Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on which part of the world you are joining from. My name is Patrick Pavlacic, and I am the Chief Intelligence Officer of BONARD, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on best markets for undergraduate student recruitment in 2024. I'm joined today by three colleagues who will share their perspectives and views on the latest market intelligence when it comes to international student recruitment. During the webinar, we want to make this experience as interactive as possible. If you have any questions, thoughts, or insights you'd like to share, please feel free to utilize the Q&A section. We'll be actively monitoring your questions, and at the end of our presentation, there's going to be room to answer as many of these as possible. The webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing it with attendees after the session. As I mentioned, today I have the pleasure of welcoming my colleagues, namely Ivana Bartoshik, who is our International Education Director. I am also joined by Sarah Huerkinova, who is the Senior Research Manager, and also, last but not least, Dave Amo, who is our Associate Researchers. Thank you so very much for finding the time to join me today. Very briefly about BONARD, and to those of you who are not familiar with our firm, we are an independent research and advisory firm specialized in international education. We work with governments, associations, individual universities and schools and service providers. We assist with connecting institutions to opportunities with strategy building, but also advisory and policy making. We're based in Vienna, Austria, have two other offices in Europe, and also presence in China and Latin America. Just to brief you about the session outline, in the next 50 minutes or so, we will deliver the latest overview of undergraduate student enrollment trends and a comparison of the 4 selected destinations. We attempted to put their respective statistics on a like-to-like basis, and each of our speakers will then present the results of our analysis of growth and emerging markets for each destination. For growth drivers, we mean markets who've already obtained significant volume and are driving international undergraduate numbers for the respective destinations, whereas markets to watch are the ones we would normally attribute to as emerging markets, or markets which exhibit rapid growth, but hasn't really reached the volume of growth drivers. So we will do a bit of both, which is going to hopefully help you in setting up your own recruitment strategies. Now, we will work with publicly available data, predominantly on enrollment trends and visa statistics where full year data is not yet available. We've sort of conducted this exercise to also showcase what you can do within your own organization when it comes to data-driven recruitment and marketing planning. And last but not least, we will provide some high-level advice on go-to-market approaches. And if we inspire you or help you with this type of exercise, we will consider it mission accomplished. Let me start with pointing to some implications stemming from the global context. I think we all have experienced that recent years were quite dramatic for the international education sector and have left a deep footprint on the international education arena. We know that for institutions, international student revenues are more important than ever. And as a reaction to recent market happenings and circumstances, we see education providers continue to employ risk mitigation strategies to protect their international student revenue. Some of the reactions, most notable ones, were obviously increased online offering. We see institutions branching out to online delivery as a means of expanding the reach to prospective international students, but also safeguarding the continuity of education delivery. We also see an increased interest in expansion through branch campuses establishment and transnational activity. We call these happenings as destinations trying to get closer to the source markets, being present, which obviously helps with the short-term recruitment goals, but also create very important long-term student pipelines. We also are witnessing greater investment in international marketing and recruitment activities. And I'd also like to add infrastructure. It is very important in some markets and destinations like Canada to continuously build the student accommodation supply, which we all know is a bit of a problem at the moment and can impact future enrollment to Canada. And last but not least, it is the desire to diversify student body. And by that, we not only mean increasing the number of student nationalities, but also offering a wide variety of programs and courses and inviting students to apply to study for these. And also from a destinations perspective to enhance individual locations, teaching locations where students study. I'm going to move on to sort of share the destination benchmark that we prepared. There's a few caveats that I would like to mention before we will go into individual destinations. First of all, as I said, we are working with publicly available data. And I would also like to note that when primarily enrollment data is not available, we used our own forecast to predict the final figures for the 2021-2022 academic year. So what you're looking at is the international undergraduate student enrollment benchmark. As you can see, with the exception of the US, the rest of the destinations have experienced a positive development prior to the pandemic. The US peaked in terms of undergraduate student recruitment in 2017/18, and between that particular year and 2021/2022 actually lost almost 100,000 undergraduate students. This is a significant development, in particular if we connect it to the fact that the number of domestically enrolled students at the undergraduate level has been declining as well. And that fuels even more activity towards international student recruitment and becoming more of an imperative for institutions in the US to reach out to overseas markets. If we look very closely at the trajectory for the UK, Australia, and Canada, it's been relatively mirroring each other up until 2018-19, where the growth for the UK has sort of accelerated, and the UK saw a significant increase, while Canada and Australia have sort of gradually, incrementally built their undergraduate student population. It is quite important to put this into a global context. If you look at those 4 destinations combined and look at their cumulative market share on the global student mobility flow, we see that the actual market share has been declining, and it's been declining since the previous decade. I'd say that this is a pretty normal development, considering a world where other destinations have become more active in setting goals and strategies for international recruitment themselves. And we saw the rise of intra-regional mobility, like in Asia, and destinations such as Singapore or Malaysia are also attracting an increasing number of students, not to mention Europe obviously becoming a destination on its own. Now, we will start with the US because it is the largest undergraduate student market. And I'd like to invite my colleague, Ivana, to share her perspectives and the results of the analysis that she prepared.
Thank you, Patrick. So let's just start with the US market. One of the aims of this presentation is to really show you possibilities, how to identify opportunities in individual source markets that can help you with your recruitment and diversification efforts. And there are several ways, but I'm going to show you 2 in particular ways how to identify the opportunities on an example of the US undergraduate market. So first, if we have a look on the chart on the left, it's the way how we look at data is through highest percentage growth in undergraduate students. So you're looking for markets that have strong year-on-year growth. For example, you can see it's Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Fiji. But at the same time, you also have to consider a volume as a second marker. And that's because you have to see the moment and to identify when the actual year-on-year growth brings sufficient volume for your recruitment. A good example is Fiji. Fiji had one of the highest year-on-year increases, but volume-wise, it's rather small undergraduate market. Whereas if you have a look at Myanmar, it had already a solid volume in the academic year 2020 and 2023, and also saw a double-digit year-on-year growth. So that's where you're looking for the opportunities. The second way on how to look for the opportunities is to identify the highest volume growth. So you look for markets that had the highest increase in volume, such as in the case of US undergraduate market, that's India, Nepal, and South Korea. But here you have to keep in mind that these markets probably has been developing for some time, and therefore when entering the market, your institution will face competition. So this would be the first step. So once you have the potential markets for recruitment identified, it's very important to understand how to recruit and market, as the approaches will be different for individual markets. And I'm going to provide you with an example, and I'm going to take India, as it is a growing market, even for undergraduate sector. It is a sizable market and is also predicted to grow. As you may know, traditionally, India is a market where about 2/3 of the students are graduate. However, with the size of the market, 1/3 of undergraduate market still offers a significant volume. But to recruit from India, we have to understand that this is a market that is very fragmented, is highly unregulated. It is a market that has almost 1,500 education agencies that are spread across the country with more than 4,000 offices. And it is a market where students seek the services of education agencies for study abroad purposes. So first and foremost, it's very important to find a good partner for recruitment, and it is key to success. The second area to focus on is to really understand where the demand is coming from India, as it significantly varies across individual states or regions. And that goes hand in hand with the first step. You need to find a partner who is actually have a presence in that particular cities or states where the demand for US is coming. To be more specific, for example, we know that Andhra Pradesh and Telangana with Hyderabad is traditionally where the largest hub in terms of the number of students sent abroad, and it is heavily focused on US, specifically for the IT sector, AI, business analytics, etc. And those students do enjoy, as a destination in the US, Arizona, California, or Florida. However, if you look for a demand that is coming for undergraduate programs, we also see a rise from Gujarat for various fields of studies, or Kolkata, which is predominantly driven by non-STEM programs. Or generally, south from Hyderabad, for example, Kerala, are the states or places where the demand for US and undergraduate students is coming from. These are one way or two options how to identify opportunities. The other one I'm going to showcase you on the next slide. The other option is to look for opportunities where we see a shift of demand from one destination to another one. So we have seen a growth of undergraduate students coming from Europe as a result of Brexit. If you look at the chart and on the goal in the cold color, you see the performance 3 years ago, where EU numbers were in decline. But now, with the requirements for EU students to actually have visa to study in the UK and to pay international student fees, there is an opportunity for other destinations. And we have seen a slight increase also for the US, albeit still small, with the opportunity that still lies in Europe. For example, to be specific with the countries, markets where you can look for the demand for undergraduate students is especially Spain, but also Germany or Netherlands, as they offer already a volume and they have been steadily growing. And last but not least, we can look at the last slide before a summary. And often the question is how to maybe identify the sources or the information before we actually see the annual statistics coming out for the previous academic year. So one of the ways for US is actually series data, especially now when they're coming out every single month. Here you are able to see slight changes compared to what we saw for the academic year 2022 and 2023. Some markets confirmed the growth, for example, Myanmar and Bangladesh, we have seen on the previous slides as well. But here also an African country, Ghana, is coming up as a market that actually has a growth. We also see a growth that is coming from Central Asia, from countries such as Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan. So to sum it up on the last slide, let's have a look where the opportunities for the recruitment of undergraduate students in US lies. There are two ways how me and my colleagues looked at the opportunities, and those are the markets that are growth drivers. So those that already have volume and continue to grow, and markets to watch that might have, for now, rather smaller volume, but they are showing signs of growth in the past several years. And they also meet several factors that kind of push the outbound mobility from the particular country. So to sum it up, where the potential lies, it's definitely South Asia, and it is an important engine for growth here, especially as we see countries such as Bangladesh, Myanmar, India, and Nepal. Also, East Asia, China is coming back. I do believe that we'll see the full potential next academic year. But for East Asia, South Korea is making a steady growth with relatively high volume. We will probably not see a double-digit increases from South Korea, but it's a stable, well-established market, a very safe option for recruitment. I also mentioned to you Europeans shifting to the US, so there is a potential to recruit, especially from countries such as Spain. We see LATAM performing strongly across board, across destination, and US is not the exception. We see, for example, Peru as one of the markets to look out for, which have steady growth. Again, all the conditions there are showing a strong outbound mobility. Similarly for Brazil, but then with Brazil, the year-on-year increases are a little bit more volatile than with Peru. As I mentioned to you, Central Asia is growing fast, but with this region, as with many of the emerging markets, it's very important to have good partners. So you are able to have partners who recruit for you bona fide students. And as for all other destinations as well, Africa is performing generally good. We saw an increase from Ethiopia in last year. And as I mentioned to you, pointing out to CV's data, Ghana is one of the countries that is on the rise. Those are the opportunities that we identify for the undergraduate market in the US. And I'm giving the word back to my colleagues.
Thank you, Ivana, for this insightful overview. As you can see, we're really touching the surface at the moment, given the time availability that we have. But Dave, would you care to continue? And I think your comparisons to the UK are going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks very much, Patrick and Ivana. Yeah, so very quickly, my name's Dave Moore, and I've been working in international higher education for 20 years, initially as an agent, and then in the pathway sector, working in sales, operations, and then latterly in kind of business intelligence and market research. And that's where I first came across BONARD through their insights into ELT and student accommodation, which I had some responsibility for inter-university partnerships. So yeah, I'm going to quickly run through some UK data. There's quite a lot to digest, so I'll crack on straight away. I think an important thing and what I'll be focusing on is perhaps a little bit more kind of tactical, or in terms of how we look at data in the UK. But for the UK, we're extremely fortunate. We've got the undergraduate application system, UCAS, which really covers, most students that apply for undergraduate study in the UK. It's incredibly powerful data. It's very comprehensive, and kind of almost most importantly for someone like myself, it's available really quite fast. So, in December, we'll have comprehensive data looking at who joined degree programs, who completed UCAS for the UK in this September just past, and then, almost more importantly, we also have that view through UCAS of the forward-looking demand. So, key applicant deadlines during the year will have information on, how many applicants from different countries have applied, typically, January and June, and then in the summer, the most important times in the year. So we get a forward-looking view of what's going to happen and have the opportunity to sort of react and work with that data. So yeah, I'll have a very quick look at it now. So overall, it was just under 1% decline in accepted applicants for UCAS in 2023 internationally. And whilst that might not look great, this is down from an absolute historic high in 2022. And the UK overtook the US pre-pandemic in terms of new undergraduate enrollments each year. So the 2022 benchmark was always going to be very, very hard to live up to, as we saw sort of the disappearance of kind of post-pandemic pent-up demand, and then we saw the re-emergence of the UK's key competitor countries after the UK performed so strongly through keeping its borders open during the pandemic. If we look at the slide here, it's similar formats to that which we saw from Ivana. On the left-hand side, we're looking at countries that have had the fastest year-on-year percentage growth, with the columns there representing the volumes. We can see there strong performance from Myanmar, Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. And then on the right-hand side, yes, that's the view looking at the countries with the greatest volume growth, as we saw for the US. India, the largest single driver of increases in undergraduate volumes. And then also on that right-hand side, we're seeing, some similarities. Myanmar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Zimbabwe also appearing in the countries with the largest growth. So that's the non-EU picture. In the next slide, we take the slightly more sort of depressing view of the EU market for the UK. Overall growth for the EU year on year is down 2%, which, as someone based in the UK, is almost, a good sign. If you see in that blue circle up the top right there, the actual decline since 2020 is 64% down. So since the introduction of the requirement for visas and international student fees, as we expected, there's been serious declines, but it does look for the UK as if we might be nearing the bottom there. Here we're looking at the top markets for the EU. Ireland there, the biggest for growth. It is, of course, a slight anomaly and doesn't really belong in there in many ways, because Irish students are still free to travel to the UK and still enjoy domestic fees. So that is, perhaps what the EU might have been looking like if it hadn't been for the introduction of the visa regulations and the fees. And then on the right-hand side, what we're looking at is 3-year change. So you can see all those top markets, outside of Ireland, suffering really, really significantly. I mean, look at Poland there, absolutely shocking, down 89%. But like I said, it does look like we're nearing the bottom. At the same time, clearly for recruiters to other destinations, then the EU increasingly might be a growth opportunity, as Ivana was saying just now. On the next slide, we are going to take a look at HESA data, and this is just kind of making it very explicit that change in non-EU and EU data. So both were growing well up to 2021. And then we see the really big drop-off in EU numbers. HESA is really useful data, to infer additional information from what we get through UCAS. HESA tells us, what actually enrolled. So looking at it by a sort of individual market basis, we can see typically what the correlation is between accepted applicants in UCAS and actual arrivals. And there's significant variation. For example, a country like the United Arab Emirates typically has far fewer enrollments ultimately in HESA than it does accepted applicants in UCAS. And I imagine that's just due to a lot of applying to multiple destinations and looking outwardly and potentially ending up studying in UAE anyway. Whereas a country like India, you typically see far more students arriving in HESA than you do having accepted applications in UCAS, and that's partly because they arrive through a number of different routes, be it kind of pathway or possibly, TNE. So what you'd expect to see from HESA is an even higher number of Indian students. So that growth, that volume growth we saw in the UCAS data is likely to be even larger when it arrives in HESA. The other thing is, looking at HESA data, we can see typical and historic trends and splits between undergraduate and postgrad studies by destination. And so that might be useful for us when sort of trying to infer what undergrad trends might mean for us in our postgraduate recruitment. Right, and then I move forward to the next slide. Running out of time here. So another thing to think of, and just an element that as a kind of market researcher and someone that looks at data, income brackets tend to be fairly consistent and have a strong indicator in terms of which markets are most likely to produce undergraduate students. At undergraduate level, you have a higher proportion of students coming from high income and upper middle income countries, and that's really just because the investment required for undergraduate studies is that much heavier. The EU student decline there is the reason behind the drop in the percentage coming from high income countries in 21-22. But it's why it's worth keeping an eye on exchange rates and the broader kind of economic environment of source markets when you're contemplating who to target with your particular undergraduate strategies. On the right-hand side now, it's just a quick look at visas in the UK for institutions from which you might recruit international students from the UK. So FE colleges, independent schools, and possibly English language schools. What we've got there is 12-month rolling visa statistics, and what you can see there is that the signs are good from that sector. And importantly, at the end of this week, we'll be expecting the Q3 visa statistics for the UK, which will give us a really strong indication of who's arrived this autumn just past and what markets are likely to be performing well. Final slide, I think. Just a very quick summary. Yeah, India and South Asia, hugely important for the UK. We're seeing some strong performances from the Middle East. And EU, let's not give up on them yet. Seems to be bottomed out, and market share should be available to those that have the right strategy and approach. Africa doing well. Nigeria growth has stalled, and we know why that is. The sort of UK stance towards students from Nigeria and the change in policy with regards to ability to bring dependents has put a dampener on that. Elsewhere, East and Southeast Asia, a very big region, huge populations, overall a little bit more challenging, but there are still some markets that are important to play in and that are exhibiting growth. So the growth drivers, as my takeaways, India, UAE, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Bangladesh, and the ones to watch, Kenya, Ghana, Azerbaijan, Myanmar, and Mexico. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave, for the comprehensive summary. I very much appreciate giving a comparison to the US and also identifying the recruitment opportunities for the UK. Now, I'm going to follow up with Australia, and just to complement on what you said about data availability, I do think that Australia likewise has great data. There's been recently an overhaul of the market information package, which I think is the premier source for any Australian provider looking at building strategies and so forth. And from that perspective, we'll be using and referring to the data published by the Department of Education. And wherever possible, we will try to complement this with visa statistics by the Department of Home Affairs. Now, I'm going to start with showcasing the top undergraduate markets. As I said, Australia does produce really great data. But since we're working with publicly available statistics, there's going to be some limitations because some of the breakdowns, such as the breakdown by source market and level of study, I believe is only available to premium subscribers of the ADI platform. Looking at the macro picture, you can see that China is still the #1 source market for undergraduate students. This is for bachelor level specifically, so I've removed any other undergrad courses. And it's closely followed by India and Nepal. Actually, India and Nepal switched places during the pandemic. And then you see sort of a long tail of smaller markets. So complementing what Ivana said about China and its return, we do believe that there is still potential in recruitment from China, and the market will gradually return. Looking at historical trends, and this is where that limitation comes into play, we're able to compare 3 different time series. So in the green color, we do have year-to-date data for the whole 2020. Then we have in blue color a snapshot for enrollments up until September 2021. And the last one is the latest sort of January to August enrollment figures. But I think it's still very, very useful and relevant for anyone to see which markets have already surpassed their sort of pre-pandemic levels. And this is what I was talking about, India and Nepal sort of switching places, and India being the leading market that fuels growth for Australian universities recruiting undergraduate students. What is also noteworthy is the performance of Bangladesh and Bhutan. Bhutan experienced 226% growth between 2020 and 2023, which poised it to be the fastest growing market for Australia. And also what we've seen elsewhere, performance of Kenya, also very, very strong. I do believe that looking at the data, those traditionally stronger markets in Africa for graduate programs are now also continuously delivering numbers for undergrad recruitment. And we also see some of our other markets located in Southeast Asia. Obviously, this is a very, very important source region for Australia. And probably compared to the UK and the US, when we look at the geographies and the regions producing growth for Australia at the moment is quite restricted to Asian markets. Now, what is also important when looking at the markets or for future opportunities and emerging markets, obviously visa data. So Australian providers do have the opportunity to get very frequent data from the Department of Home Affairs and on the actual visa grant rate. Now, this is not specifically for undergrad programs. This is for higher education as such. And I've sort of combined some of the markets that are already driving significant volumes, like Bhutan, Bangladesh, as well as some of the emerging markets that we recognized and identified for the Australian international education sector. As you can see, historically, the grant rate was actually improving for most of these markets for this specific case study. However, we do see and notice a bit of a downturn in the overall grant rate in the year-to-date September 2023 data. So again, very important to not only look at enrollment data, but also visa grant rate, so that you can come up with a more precise yield calculations and see how your investment actually translates into recruited students. I'm going to move on to the summary on Australia so that we still leave out some time for a Q&A. I saw some questions coming in. Thank you so very much for those. In terms of growth drivers, we see India overtaking Nepal in terms of student numbers. Just to reiterate, Southeast Asia is the region driving the growth, and most of the markets located in this particular region are already above their pre-pandemic levels. Bhutan is a really nice example of a country that is experiencing rapid growth trajectory who are already offering significant volume increase, very similar to what Nepal used to deliver 2-3 years ago, or that kind of trajectory that we saw. Interestingly, for Australian providers, we see markets in Africa picking up, and as I noted, some of them were traditionally stronger for grad recruitment, but when we look at the pace of growth, it seems that there are opportunities for undergrad recruitment as well. When we look at the rest of the world and some of the key regions, assessing the recruitment potential for European markets, that is going relatively slow, unlike what Ivana was showing for the US, where we saw sort of conservative but reasonable numbers. In Australia, major markets like Italy, Germany, Spain, France are still sort of struggling to reach the potential. And if we look at the main markets in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, or Oman, these markets are struggling at the moment, and we see that the mobility is shifting more towards the UK. So the UK is benefiting from that growth, just to provide some cross-destination perspectives. And last but not least, looking at LATAM, we also see for higher education that the potential is not met. Unlike, for instance, in the ELICOS sector, so intensive English language programs, where Latin markets are really, really booming, and they have been booming for the most part of 2023. And actually, Colombia has become the biggest source market in 2022 and posted significant growth in 2023. So a bit of a cross-sector comparison over there, but that growth is at the moment still quite geographically constricted to South East Asia in general. And as we showcased, the addition of the visa data as a practical tool for providers to again put a bit of a magnifying glass over the enrollment figures and try to look at the yield calculations. So to summarize, markets that deliver growth in terms of volume, India, not surprising. I think that it's quite obvious that India is the best performing market in terms of overall student figures for all our 4 destinations in our comparison, followed by Nepal, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Bhutan. Again, these 2 markets also exhibiting rapid year-on-year growth. When it comes to markets to watch in 2024, we believe that Kenya is going to continue offering significant recruitment opportunities, already reaching reasonable volume in terms of students. Philippines, Mongolia. Mongolia also has had a relatively solid 2023, also for the ELICOS sector in Australia. And Fiji and Uganda, not necessarily in terms of the volume, rather than looking at the pace of growth, posing opportunities in the future. So that would be a quick look at Australia, and we're going to wrap up with an overview of Canada. I'm going to invite my colleague Sarah to do the honors.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And I'm really delighted to shed more light on the dynamic landscape of the undergraduate market in Canada. So moving to the first slide, and starting with a little bit more macro perspective, we saw that at the end of 2022, there were more than 189,000 undergraduate international students in Canada. And over the last 5 years, the number of these undergraduate enrollments increased from 150,000, which can be also translated into the growth of 26%. At the same time, the preliminary data, according to IRCC, also points to continued growth across the markets, also displayed here on this slide. And international student enrollments in Canada have increased, and this really several factors contributed to these trends, which includes Canada's reputation for high quality education, diverse and inclusive environment, and also really important postgraduate work rights and work opportunities for international students. When taking a closer look on the top source markets for higher education, you can see here a chart on the slide which displays the share of students opting for a bachelor degree. And while India being a top market driving a growth for Canada, as you can see, only 13% of these students opt for undergraduate programs, while on the other hand, there is a China where undergraduate enrollments accounting for 75%. It is also important to mention that for some markets, even where the share of studying bachelor's degrees, we see a total bachelor volume growing, such as countries Bangladesh, Algeria, or Nigeria. And at the same time, when examining markets with a strong emphasis on undergraduate programs, we observe like substantial representation from the Middle East, Africa, as well as China. On the following slide, and applying the same approach to analyzing the undergraduate opportunities in the United States, UK, or Australia, this allows to identify areas experiencing growth. And as data indicates, Nepal, Ghana, Guinea, Philippines, and even Peru exhibit significant growth paired with a substantial volume. In terms of volumes alone or individually, India is at the forefront of growth, of course, closely followed by Nigeria and Bangladesh. Traditionally, similar also to other destinations, South Asia is experienced like rapid growth for the undergraduate market. At the same time, we see that the French-speaking countries hold significant prominence in Canada, seeing it apart from other destinations, and the robust growth observed from Africa and North Africa regions, including Algeria, Nigeria as well, and Congo, as well as Ghana. For instance, in case of exceptional growth in Algeria, it's quite interesting to see that there was, we saw that the growth coming from 600 students to more than 3,000 in 2022. And on the other hand, for Nigeria, Nigeria itself was Canada's fastest growing international student market population for first half of 2023. However, it is at the same time really important to mention that these markets are really price sensitive and usually heavily relies on the scholarships offering and schemes provided by individual universities when students simultaneously looking for a balance between affordable living costs and the supporting scholarship schemes. Last but not least, what I would mention here is that a lot of markets, even displayed here on the slides, are really impacted by the high visa refusals rates, especially in case of the African markets, which will impact their further enrollments to Canada. While understanding the year-on-year growth is important when we move to another slide, it is also important to see what are the trends over the last 5 years. And on the following slide, we are showcasing the top 10 markets experiencing the largest increase over the last 5 years, so between 2018 and 2022. And as said, India is driving the growth for Canada, already exceeding its pre-pandemic volume by 31%, and it is followed by Bangladesh, exceeding it by 15%. For these top 10 markets, despite the driving the overall growth and the undergraduate mobility to Canada, it is also important to mention that the distribution of students from these markets towards the individual provinces in Canada differs. So, for instance, countries with the past colonial history with France mostly opt for Quebec as a study destination, such as in case of the Algeria, or on the other hand, there is the Mexico, whose students choosing predominantly programs in British Columbia. Interestingly, what we see now is in case of the Bangladesh, while Ontario is keeping its top position as a first position as a top province for these students, there is also growing demand for provinces such as the Manitoba or Newfoundland and Labrador. This is also impacted by of course, the affordability and the living costs in the individual provinces across the Canada. And generally speaking, is that most of these markets are highly price sensitive, largely influenced by the currency exchange rate as well, and therefore is also essential from position of the individual universities to carefully consider also your pricing strategies for these markets and regions. To sum it up, and when we move to last slide related to Canada, the expansion of undergraduate enrollments in Canada has really experienced significant growth, driven by increasing demand from the key markets such as the India, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Algeria as well. And these are the markets predicting driving growth for 2023 and the following years as well, and some already exceeding the 2022 enrollments during the first 3 quarters of 2023. However, there are, of course, the markets which we should definitely to watch, and these are markets, as I said, these are not the largest in the size in terms of the undergraduate students, however, experiencing the growth both in a volume wise and percentage wise. And in case of the Canada, we are talking about the increase ranging between 400 to 600 students per year. And these markets, however, are still impacted by the high refusals rate. In case of Canada, these are the markets which should definitely stay on the radars for growth across not only undergraduate level, but across all higher education segments and levels of study. So in case of the Canada, there is also solid foundation and promising markets and as you can see, for markets for which we selected Nepal, Ghana, Sri Lanka, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Iran. In addition to these mentioned markets, countries such as Myanmar or Guinea are, from our perspective, also interesting to observe. For instance, in case of the Guinea, this market has almost tripled in the size, with a significant increase in the number of students opting for undergraduate programs in Canada. Myanmar, though smaller in the size of the number of students in Canada, is also experiencing growth driven by expansion in the middle class, underscoring the substantial population that will fuel the demand in the future. So with this, I would like to conclude this part related to Canada and passing words back to Patrick.
Thank you, Sarah. I know that we have a couple minutes left, so I'm just going to glance through the summary and some high-level recommendations that we prepared for individual institutions. Now, as you can see, they year-on-year change in terms of undergraduate recruitment is relatively mixed, but the foundation for future recruitment and the importance of undergrad recruitment for institutions will continue to grow in the foreseeable future. In terms of geographies, we see that Africa and South Asia are driving growth in all destinations covered. That geography factor and location will drive differences in key source markets. And we do believe that there's going to be many battlegrounds for market share improvements. And in fact, it is sort of starting to be a zero-sum game for the main destinations. While the future outlook remains uncertain, we see that it is going to be more stable than in recent years, with several markets looking like offering sustained growth. So again, that kind of targeted approach when it comes to undergrad recruitment is going to be absolutely key for individual destinations. Now, I appreciate that we sort of run through all the markets fairly quickly. So we did provide a summary in terms of those markets where we see that growth levels are accelerating and there is good foundation, good outlook for future recruitment for individual institutions. As you can see, that picture is relatively unique for each of the markets. Nevertheless, there are some commonalities and markets which we think have kind of the ultimate sending power potential. This would be, for instance, Myanmar, but also Ghana, and for many markets, it is also Nepal, which is kind of providing that sustained growth at a very attractive growth pace. In terms of go-to-market approaches, I think when we sat down and we tried to conclude this presentation with some practical advice for institutions, I think we couldn't stress enough the importance of proper planning. Considering all the complexities that undergrad student recruitment entails, but also the geographical element, we really advise institutions to plan long-term. If you are looking for short-term ROI, probably some of these markets would not be the ones to look for a kind of a quick return on investment. However, they do have the potential to become a fine source for diversifying your student population. But what is equally important is to continually assess and reassess your plans and activities. I also would like to stress the importance of your unique selling points, identifying your key study programs you'd like to focus on, reviewing your existing distribution network, and your market share. Secondly, the awareness component, to be really on top of your own institutional data and combine it with the available public data. I think we've used this demonstration to provide you that there is already depth of information available. And certainly myself, I've seen that kind of transition of the sector to a more transparent industry than it used to be a decade ago. So our advice is really to connect to regular streams of market intelligence, which will feed in your recruitment activities and inform your steps. In field experience, we suggest to be really spot on with your local partners, students and parents, and learn about specific nuances in these markets that we've discussed to give you that kind of competitive advantage, and to learn how to work with these so that it can be leveraged in your marketing and recruitment activities. The fourth practical piece of advice would be to benchmark. Know your competitors and have sort of a monitoring program in place, which will regularly inform how you perform against them, and also identify best practices in the field as they relate to these specific markets. And last but not least, it is all about contingencies. We encourage providers to have plans and actions ready for when things go south, but also to know when to launch these plans. So I think that the timing of these adjustments is as important as their execution. And finally, we do have a complimentary service for industry professionals, which is embodied in our market monitor. I think in our 15+ experience working with the international education sector, we've realized that in order to be fully informed, you'd need to go to access dozens, if not hundreds, of websites and resources. And we've created a team who's dedicated to curate daily news for our clients and partners. And we'd like to extend the invitation for you to join this service, as it provides sort of a selection of top 10 to 15 daily news. And for more advanced or sophisticated market-specific assistance, I'd like to also refer you to some of our services that we provide. At this point, I would like to thank my fellow panelists and moderator. Thank you for finding the time to conduct the analysis. I trust that this is going to be really useful for all of our attendees today. I do believe that we have a few minutes left for some Q&As. So let me quickly choose two of the latest. There is a question from Lesanka. Good afternoon. Would the changes in official language in Algeria will have any impact on UK undergraduate market? Dave, I think I'd invite you to answer this one, and the rest of us can then chip in.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thanks very much for the question. I guess the short answer is I'd expect it to. The question is how quickly will it have an impact? But in terms of kind of a signal that might immediately start influencing how people make their decisions, and it might facilitate them considering an English language speaking destination much earlier than they might otherwise. So I mean, Algeria has been a small but consistently growing market for the UK, both at undergraduate and graduate. Graduate's been more significant, but the recent visa data for Algeria is positive as well. So if you were sort of contemplating or you're planning strategies and North Africa is an area in which you're operating, then is Algeria somewhere worth considering? Then yeah, once again, I'd sort of look at your data, think about how you benchmark and who's actually being successful in Algeria, but certainly that there do seem to be increasing opportunities, and I'd expect the UK to see benefits from this policy decision, and most likely at the expense of France and Canada.
Right, thank you. And I think that there is this analogy in Morocco, I think, with the government policy to also adopt the English language. We've seen some shifts in the English language travel market, which translated into growing demand for English language programs. So I think that it is very highly likely that these kind of government changes in policy will be influencing future trends as well. There is another question about a very interesting one on TNE. Is there any data on growth of TNE/double degree programs across all markets? Thanks very much, Robert, for the question. I think I'll give a quick answer to that and let my colleagues complement. When it comes to TNE programs, I think the UK and Australia are the leading destinations in terms of data reporting, and they do provide quite in-depth information on the number of students, on the countries, on the programs, also partnerships model. So I do recommend going to the HESA website for the UK, and also the Department of Education in case of Australia. When it comes to the US, I think that there is an issue with data fragmentation or even accessibility. I think that there's only data on sort of individual branch campuses. But as I said, that market is quite fragmented. And in case of Canada, I'm not familiar with any statistics regarding the TNE or double degree program offering. Happy to follow up on that question as well and provide more data and information. And I think looking at some of there's a few more questions, but I'm cognizant of the time. So let me promise that we will answer these questions individually. And at the moment, I would really like to take this opportunity to thank you all for finding the time to join us today. As I said at the beginning, if we were able to help you, if we were able to inspire you, we will consider this mission accomplished. And in case you would like to go through individual scenarios or would be interested in scheduling a complimentary consultation, there is an email address that you can use to reach out to us, and we'll be very delighted to have a conversation. Thank you so very much, and we wish you a nice rest of the day.